I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome back, guys. Oh man, we have so much to dive into today. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone on Rockfin, YouTube, Twitter, and Rumble. Happy Sunday, guys. Happy Sunday. If you're new, I want to let you know that Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and every other Sunday. And this is that Sunday. We're going to go ahead and jump right in, guys. Let's go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat because we have a lot to discuss. So much happened since I saw you guys on Friday. So much has happened. Shout out to Nas says Jill Stein was arrested. Hashtag Jill Stein 2024. Yes, we have good news and bad news for Jill. We're going to get into both of that tonight. Shout out to Tate says, did the Americans realize that they are 100% controlled by AIPAC Zionist lobbyists? ? I think people are coming to those terms, Tates. Shout out to Kenman says, I love Sabby. What's up, Kenman? Love you too. Greetings, Randy says, is a pretty stormy good afternoon, Sabby comrades, here outside Syracuse, New York. It's actually pretty unusually warm here right now in Massachusetts for April. Yeah, I was surprised at how warm it was today. So yeah, weird weather going on here. Shout out to Hannah G, sends a smile. Greetings, Joanne says, hello, Sabby family, or Joan, sorry. I don't know why I said Joanne. Greetings, Lorez says, sup, Sabrina, Eric, Corey, and Sabby fam. Jill Stein picked Jeffrey Sachs as VP ? Not exactly, Lorez, but we'll get into that. Apparently, he was an economic hitman, but now he's progressive. So Don Lemon is just embarrassing now. Smash the like, y'all. Yes, go ahead and hit that like button. Shout out to P Stubb says Zionism, the root of all. And I think that's evil. Greetings, Lawrence Johnson says free Jill Stein. That's right. We're going to get into that. Shout out to Red Six says hello, Sabby. Greetings, Jacqueline says hi, everyone. What's all this about Jill Stein? Oh, Jacqueline, we're going to get into it. Shout out to Jonathan says hey, all. Greetings, CBC voter says happy Sunday, Sabby Sabs. Shout out to Kaiwan says, she's really getting her money's worth of the Israeli and PEP competition. Not sure what that's all about, but welcome. Shout out to VM Tour says, what up? Greetings, Sherry says, hey, chat peeps, sending good vibes and much love to everyone this beautiful Sunday. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here today. Shout out to Dublin says, I'm glad they let Jill Stein out. What a bunch of you-know-what that did that to her. This is not the first time that Jill Stein has been arrested while she's running for office. So we'll get into that. Shout out to Wesley says, hugs, chat, sending those hugs. Greetings, Volvo says, hey, Cookie. Shout out to Retro Gamer says, hello. Greetings. Welcome. Greetings, New Sheep says, bah. Shout out to my comrade JB says, hello, everyone. Hope you're having an amazing Sunday afternoon. In the words of Lionel Richie, I hope it's easy like Sunday morning. Forehead kisses. Now go dancing on the ceiling, you crazy kids. JB and I like Lionel Richie songs. We love Lionel Richie songs. Dancing on the ceiling, 'cause I'm easy. Easy like Sunday morning. That's a good one, JB. Shout out to Eric T. Red says, hey, yo, big Sunday show. Greetings, Casey sends solidarity and fire. Shout out to Aunt Shawnee TV says, hi, everyone. What's up, Kim says, here we go. And shout out to Astro says, I've been reading comments under protest videos, and man, it's sad to see how many people have such totalitarian viewpoints, begging for the state to use the jackboots. Yeah, continued. All of these proud Americans who have no knowledge or respect for the Bill of Rights. Yeah, people are using it to fit their narrative instead of using it all across the board. And I think that's been revealed a lot in reference to the protests for Palestine. Shout out to Lou says, Mike. Eric, is my mic okay? I think my mic's good. Maybe you meant something else. And shout out to Michael says, hey, everyone, let's go ahead and dive right in, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do it. Let's go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. You're keeping the lights on around here, holding up the fort. Thank you so much. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. Ultimate. I made this too small. I think I zoomed out. And now I zoomed it too big. There we go. Ultimate Sabinators. There's also Sabsters in the house. Shout out to the Sabbies. Doing the damn thing. Lots of Sabbies. Don't forget about those members as well. All of their names are listed here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker for Reels. You guys ready to get into it? Are you ready to get into it? Danny says, seems like Lionel is stuck on you, Sabby. Oh, stuck on you. Guys, getting into all the Lionel songs now. We could do a whole show about Lionel Richie songs. Won't get into Lionel's personal life, though. We're not going to go there. All right, let's go ahead and share that thumbnail so you can see what we're discussing tonight. So many things to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. It's amazing how much happened since I saw you Friday afternoon, right? Because that was just the other day. Tonight, we are discussing Breaking Points confronts Don Lemon. We're going to get into that interview. Apparently, yes, Don Lemon was on Breaking Points. We're going to break that down tonight because I thought it was pretty interesting. It goes to show you again that even though Don Lemon is now independent, Don Lemon has not changed in reference to, you compare it to how he was on CNN. We're going to get into that. We're going to break down some of the lies that Don Lemon tried to tell on that interview. We're also going to discuss Jill Stein, huge news. And the gentleman that is next to Jill Stein in that picture, that is Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And we'll tell you why he is next to Jill and why this is a very, 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 I would say monumental announcement coming on this show. And we're also going to touch on base on what happened to Jill when she was at the protest at Washington University in St. Louis as well. So we got a lot to talk about there. We're also going to discuss Antony Blinken is accusing China, and this is kind of going viral on social media because Antony Blinken is already revealing what the U.S. government's next steps are in reference to who is to blame and why. And I'm also going to explain to you how China is responding to Antony Blinken. Oh, yes, because they have things to say and things to do. And last but not least, we are going to discuss AOC protest hypocrisy. We're going to talk about what her appearance at Columbia University actually means in the greater scheme of things. So let's do the damn thing. Let's go ahead and start giving a shout out to Clip Sauce or Sip Sauce, excuse me. Thank you so much for the super chat. And we're going to go ahead and dive in, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get started with the story about Antony Blinken and China. So it was just a couple of days ago. Antony Blinken was visiting China. He had to have some words with Xi Jinping. And, it's really interesting that after that conversation, now Antony Blinken is making accusations against China. And these are going to sound familiar to you because our government has already made these accusations towards Russia. Now they're trying to blame China for the same thing. Remember, it is election year. Get ready for it, folks. He's the first on this right now, but he won't be the last. Don't be surprised if Hillary Clinton starts to repeat the same talking points. Let's get it.
All right, we do have breaking news. Very shortly, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will head back to the United States after key meetings in China, including with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The secretary just spoke to CNN national security correspondent Kylie Atwood moments ago. Kylie joins us from Beijing. Kylie, what did he tell you?
Well, listen, he said these conversations were certainly better than his conversations with Chinese officials that happened here in Beijing 10 months ago. And that's because he said they were forthright about their differences. But one major point of tension between the U.S. and China that will only grow in the coming months is concerns about China meddling in U.S. elections. Listen to our conversation on that topic.
So as you can see, they've already started. It's election year. Joe Biden is up for re-election. So you see the narrative that they're already starting to spin. Now they're no longer saying that it's Russia that is influencing in U.S. elections. Now they are accusing China. They're starting early. It's still April. So remember this moment, because if Joe Biden loses re-election in November, you already know where they're going to put some of the blame, at least. We'll get into where they're going to put the rest of the blame.
I want to ask you about a commitment that CNN has reported President Xi made to President Biden when they met in November. We've reported that he told President Biden that China would not interfere in the upcoming presidential elections in the United States. But since then, there have been reports of online Chinese accounts that have falsely mimicked Trump supporters. Do you believe that these accounts violate President Xi's commitment?
Pause. Before he even responds to that question, where did that report come from? So you notice how they're leaving this piece of information out. I think it's really important. She says there have been reports that China is, I guess, trying to escalate Trump accounts or pretending that there are Trump accounts out there or whatever. Who made that report? Where did that information come from? Because you see, we can't just take their word, especially CNN. We'll get into all that. But CNN has been known for lying. Mainstream media is known for lying. So notice how a lot of people who are not paying attention to how media works and they're not watching independent media, they'll probably just watch this and think nothing of it. What she just said. Where did that report come from? Who made that report? Those are the questions that we need to ask. Now watch this.
What I can tell you is this. President Biden was very clear about that with President Xi, and I repeated that today in my meetings.
You repeated what?
That any interference by China in our election is something that we're looking very carefully at and is totally unacceptable to us. Look, it's something we're tracking very carefully. I can't speak to these specific reports. I can say that as a general matter, we've been very clear with China, don't do it.
But they're not violent.
Pause, and then we'll come back a little bit here. Okay. So first and foremost, can I just chime in here for a second? Newsflash, China is not thinking about us. China is not walking around thinking about U.S. politics. They could care less because they don't really need us. We need them more than they need us. This is the thing I never really understood. For the U.S. politicians that continue to smear and attack China and tend to, I guess, push and increase tensions with China, it doesn't make any sense because we are not at a point in this country where we're producing enough manufacturing in this country on our own that we don't need China. Okay, so starting some type of conflict with China actually is going to hurt American interests. It's actually going to hurt the American economy because we depend on them so much for products and goods and services and manufacturing. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that going back to the Clinton administration, they decided to send U.S. jobs overseas to China. But it's not just China. There's Mexico as well. We have auto parts that are made in Mexico, and now it's like the government wants to punish these countries because they became successful when you sent the jobs there. So think about that. That is what this is really about. But China is not thinking about us. We are not that important to them. We talk more about them than they talk about us. Danny Haifong is in China right now. Whoops. Danny Haifong is in China right now. Go look at Danny Haifong's Twitter page of his experiences in China. I believe he's also streaming. He was streaming while he was there as well. Go look at his video so you can see what it's actually like. They're not thinking about us.
We've been very clear with China. Don't do it.
But they're not violating the commitment yet, as far as you can tell?
Well, again, I'd have to look at the specific reports that you're referring to, but we have seen, generally speaking, evidence of attempts to influence and arguably interfere, and we want to make sure that that's cut off as quickly as possible.
So he tells on himself here because he's telling you that he hasn't even looked at the reports that she's referring to. But he said they know that there have been attempts of China influencing the presidential election, but he hasn't looked at the reports.
Now, it is noteworthy that he said that there is evidence of China attempting to influence and arguably interfere in U.S. elections just months after President Biden and President Xi had that conversation. It's clear that China is not heeding those warning calls from the United States. He also said that it's the concern that China is seeking to mirror what Russia is doing in terms of influence efforts in the United States, trying to sow division that are already apparent in the U.S.
So here they are still pretending like Russiagate was a thing after Russiagate has been debunked multiple times. If Antony Blinken is claiming that China is doing that, where is the evidence? Where is it? There is no evidence. They don't have any proof. They're already setting the stage for the reaction that is going to come if Joe Biden loses re-election. That is what this is about. They're not willing to admit publicly that a lot of Americans want to support Donald Trump again, and that some Americans who did not support Donald Trump in 2016 or 2020 want to support him in 2024. They don't want to admit that because admitting that means that you have to acknowledge that the Biden administration has failed. And that's the administration that he works for. That's the administration that he is a part of. So you got to remember, this is a job for Antony Blinken. So Antony's trying to make sure that he keeps his job and he stays in the social circles that he's in.
Evidence that they tried to influence and maybe interfere in the elections. Terrific to have you here, Kylie. Thank you so much for sharing this breaking news reporting.
Well, for more, Mark Stewart joins us live from Beijing. Good to see you, Mark. So the Secretary of State certainly sent a strong message to Chinese officials about its support for Russia, the US saying that it's enabling Russia to continue its brutal war in Ukraine.
Right, Linda, this relationship is among the top issues for Secretary Blinken. It's something that we anticipated he would bring up, and he certainly did. You know, China contends, if we look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, China contends it's a neutral partner, but American officials feel otherwise. They believe that China is helping Russia and its defense industry, helping it to ramp up production of things such as armored vehicles and of tanks. These concerns were once again reiterated by Secretary Blinken when he met not only with Xi Jinping, but also with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and said that there could be additional action taken. Already, there are sanctions levied against China. This comes at a time, Linda, when we have seen a relationship really blossom even further between China and Russia, especially as China tries to portray itself as an alternative, a different way of viewing the world than the United States. And
you hear that? That's the big problem. China presents itself as an alternative, and our government doesn't want you to have an alternative. They want you to have the status quo, and that's it. That's it. You can see this from the way that they implement certain policies. That's what they want you to have. China can have a relationship with whoever they want. The United States government doesn't own China. That's just like, let's pretend that like you're friends with someone. Let's say you have a best friend, right? And then it's like, I don't know, like all of a sudden it's a new year at school and you meet another person and you guys become friends too. And then it's like, the best friend that you had earlier or whatever, now they're kind of jealous and pissed that you got another friend, as if you can only have a relationship with that person. They can engage with whoever they want. China and Russia are both a part of BRICS. They are exploring the idea of a multipolar world, which honestly makes sense, where there's no head at the table, where there is horizontal organization. What is wrong with that? The US government has a problem with that because they are the ones that police the world and want to continue to police the world. They want to be at the top economically. They don't want any other country to threaten that. Now, I want you to hear the way that Fox News actually spoke about this, because this is a doozy. So they're talking about Blinken's trip to China. And then I told you before, when it comes to certain countries, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are totally fine demonizing that country. And they're totally fine supporting certain countries. Both parties support the state of Israel, even though they're committing genocide. Because those politicians are funded by AIPAC. They're funded by the Israeli lobby. Both parties support demonizing China and Russia. So think about that, folks. They're not as different as you think. Listen to the way that Fox News broke this down. The
same thing. And please don't compete with us, because we don't want the United States to be competing with China, which is exactly what we should be doing. I'm calling for us to start decoupling from China. China is our greatest adversary. Look at this whole thing about fentanyl. You know that China actually incentivizes chemical companies in China to produce the chemicals that produce fentanyl. Now, mind you, they're illegal in China. They can't sell it in China, but they can do it overseas. And so they are poisoning tens of thousands of Americans every single year with the poison that they're sending over here, and the Chinese government is actually incentivizing it.
Pause. So now the way that they're going to try to get the American people to despise China is because they're going to accuse China of poisoning people in the United States. This is how far they're willing to go, folks.
Please stop doing that. Words don't work with China. Action works with China. And that's the only thing that works with China.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Secretary of State says in the coming weeks, China and the U.S. will hold talks over artificial intelligence. What do you think will come out of those talks?
Nothing good for the United States, because this administration is unbelievably weak, and Secretary Blinken is probably the worst Secretary of State we've ever had in the history of the United States. And there's no concession that he won't give up in the name of, sometime maintaining some kind of peace. And so, no, I don't have very high hopes for any discussion between this administration and China over AI. We have to win the race to AI. It's critical to our national security interests.
Yeah.
So do you see the way that they speak about other countries that are performing well economically, or they consider to be an economic competitor? And they'll never come out and say it this way, right? Actually, maybe I think Trump actually did say it this way. Trump said the quiet part out loud. That's one of the reasons why they didn't want Trump to stay in there. Like, no, you're not supposed to tell them that. But do you see how the length that they're willing to go to destroy another country that's doing well economically? Top 10 banks in the world. China has banks in the top 5. It wasn't this way decades ago. So the U.S. government has been paying attention to that. Corporations, U.S. corporations have been paying attention to that. Wall Street is paying attention to that. This idea that only the United States can be the one, they're talking about AI. No, we have to be the one to beat them to the race of AI. Okay, so let's say that does happen and something goes wrong with AI, which it probably could. Who are they going to blame then? Can't blame anyone but ourselves. We have to be the first to do this. We have to be the ones. No other country is allowed to pursue this. This is where we are now. The United States government doesn't want to be allies. They want to be foes. They don't want to work together. Their idea of working together with these countries is to bully them into doing what they want them to do. That's their idea of working together. I'm going to tell you what you are going to do. And if you don't do what I'm going to do, then our country is going to implement sanctions on your country. And this has been going on for years.
And you talked about being strong with the Chinese. Former President Trump, it took about 2 years for him to force those changes. He slapped huge tariffs on Chinese goods and as well as technologies and banned some technologies from going over there before getting that phase 1 trade deal. Do you think the Biden administration can have enough strength to stand up and get something from China this year?
Absolutely not. Look, one of the things what they talked about was, hey, quit flooding the market with solar panels and electric vehicles. Well, what are we heading into? Solar panels and electric vehicles. So on one side, they're saying, hey, stop flooding the market that way. And yet they're demanding more solar panels and electric vehicles here in the United States and frankly, destroying our domestic energy production. And so, look, never, ever listen to the Biden administration. You got to watch what they're doing. All right. What they're doing is much more important than what they're saying. They may be saying the right things, but their actions speak otherwise. Their actions always run counter to American interests.
You can say that about any presidential administration. And we can also say that about Fox News and you, sir, as well. Seriously, politicians. Now, I want to show you a little bit more about Antony Blinken's speech when he visited China. Listen to this. Again, already threatening them. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to Beijing to lecture China and threaten consequences for the continued supply of dual-use technology to Russia. While the U.S. supplies bombs, bullets, and fighter jets to Israel to carry out the Gaza genocide, for the global South, the U.S. naked hypocrisy is on full display. What they really want China to do, here's the thing, if China were supplying weapons to Israel, the U.S. government would have no problem with that. If China were working hand in hand with Israel, Antony Blinken would be totally fine with that. But because China is choosing to work together with Russia, that is what they find to be problematic. Listen to this.
I reiterated our serious concern about the PRC providing components that are powering Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. China is the top supplier of machine tools, microelectronics, nitrocellulose, which is critical to making munitions and rocket propellants, and other dual-use items that Moscow is using to ramp up its defense industrial base. A defense industrial base that is churning out rockets, drones, tanks, and other weapons that President Putin is using to invade a sovereign country, to demolish its power grid and other civilian infrastructure, to kill innocent children, women, and men. Russia would struggle to sustain its assault on Ukraine without China's support. In my meetings with NATO allies earlier this month, and with our G7 partners just last week, I heard that same message. Fueling Russia's defense industrial base not only threatens Ukrainian security, it threatens European security. Beijing cannot achieve better relations with Europe while supporting the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War.
Why does China have to secure better relationships with Europe? Because the U.S. government says so?
As we've told China for some time, ensuring transatlantic security is a core U.S. interest. In our discussions today, I made clear that if China does not address this problem, we will. I also expressed our concern about the PRC's unfair trade practices and the potential consequences of industrial overcapacity for global and U.S. markets, especially in a number of key industries that will drive the 21st century economy, like solar panels, electric vehicles, and the batteries that power them. China alone is producing more than 100% of global demand for these products, flooding markets, undermining competition, putting at risk livelihoods and businesses around the world.
Undermining competition, he says, right, in reference to China. But then this goes back to the issue of capitalism. Isn't that just a part of capitalism? Because you see, what I've noticed time and time when a lot of people like Antony Blinken and other economists that say that they are a capitalist and they support that type of market system, they seem to be totally fine with it until another country starts to beat us at doing it, particularly if it's a country that we're not very fond of, like China. So maybe you should call out the problem with capitalism, but he won't do that. Let me show you something that is said at the very bottom of the screen here. I think this is important. You guys notice this right here? And pull back. Blinken, Xi wants to see more U.S. students in China. Oh. Think about that for a second. Now, I have, for one, have recommended that U.S. students, if you don't want to end up in a world of student loan debt, that if you can do so, to study abroad. I've been saying that for quite a long time. But now another issue that Blinken has is that they're trying to encourage U.S. students to study in China. I say go for it. Chinese students come to the U.S. and study in the U.S. Why can't American students study in China? The U.S. doesn't want any country to succeed but them. And China has chosen to respond to Blinken's visit. And I think this is very interesting. Check this out, guys. Let me make this a little bigger. China calls for UN-led international probe of the Nord Stream blast. This was released April 27th, just yesterday. A Chinese envoy on Friday called for a UN-led international investigation of September 2022 Nord Stream pipeline explosions. It has been more than 18 months since the Nord Stream incident. It is simply regretful that no conclusion has been drawn. China's deputy permanent representative to the UN made that statement. His name is Ji Shang. China notes that Sweden and Denmark, two major parties to the incident, announced in February 2024 the termination of their country-specific investigations. The two countries' investigations did not disclose substantive information, did not reveal concrete progress, and did not draw clear conclusions, sparking even more speculations and misgivings in the international community. The Nord Stream pipeline explosions were a serious incident that sabotaged transnational energy infrastructure. Since the explosions, the Security Council has considered the issue on many occasions, and many council members, including China, have been calling for an objective, impartial, and professional investigation to find out the truth as soon as possible and to bring perpetrators to justice in order to prevent the reoccurrence of similar incidents. So this is China's way of clapping back at Antony Blinken. This was released right after his visit. So China's response to the U.S. government is, okay, you want to come over here and try to tell us what to do? We are going to call on the UN to lead an investigation into the Nord Stream blast. And that is because China, and like other countries, and those of us that have been paying attention here in the United States and have paid attention to investigative journalism, and the Gray Zone had debunked the story that the US government told about the Nord Stream pipeline blast. And that is the fact that there are only one or two people that were probably involved in this, because we know that Russia did not blow up their own pipeline. That was either the United States or Ukraine, and most likely the United States. So we will see how this goes, folks. We will see how this goes. But calling for that investigation is very crucial, because it's kind of like a slap in Blinken's face. Like, he went there and said, listen, you cannot be supplying these weapons to Russia, and this is what you need to do. And China goes, okay. And then as soon as he leaves, we're going to try to work with Russia even more. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this Nord Stream blast. We are going to try to expose the United States government to the world for what it really is. We'll have to stay tuned to see what happens. But it's getting interesting, folks. They are already leading with the narrative that China is trying to interfere in the 2024 election. They moved on from Russia to China. It'll be China-gate. Thank you for the super chat, Zachary. UC Zion, Montana Tucker at UCLA crying because she couldn't get any interviews with the pro-Palestinian protesters. Did you see WHCD last night? Cringe. I don't know what WHCD is. UCWA. I don't know what that means, but that doesn't surprise me, what you said about Montana Tucker there. Shirley Kirsten says, go Jill Stein. She has my vote. Hands up. Deneen says, China ain't worried about our elections. No. They are not thinking about us. Shout out to New Beginnings for the super chat. Thank you so much. Shout out to Young Black Economists. Nigeria kicked out the U.S. off their drone base on 4/20 and increasing investments with China. I thought that was so funny. And shout out to Young Black Economists for being a member for 1 month. That is interesting. Shout out to Jay, says this speaks to the arrogance of our political elite, going to someone else's country and try to tell them what to do. The hypocrisy that's exposed, be damned. The U.S. has become totally irrelevant. Not to mention, there seems to be this trend of more Americans choosing to leave the U.S. and live abroad. That's another thing that has increased over the years. Shout out to Bookworm, Ukraine, Israel, Russia, China, billions for propaganda war. 100%. Thank you, Sip Sauce. Or Kip Sauce. I was at the protest with Jill and Chibu Asanya. Yeah, we're going to get into that next, actually. Well, shout out to you. Thank you, Snork. I only trust Iceland to investigate Nord Stream. Interesting. And Wesley says the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Yeah, I haven't gotten into that yet, but I heard about it. All right. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. Thank you so much for that. And if you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. What you waiting for? What you waiting for? Okay. We are moving on to the story about Jill Stein. So let's start off with the good news, and then we'll get into the arrest. If you are not following Dr. Jill Stein on Twitter, please make sure that you do so. A lot of the announcements are happening on that Twitter account. And then also, if you sign up for the emails, you'll get announcements that way as well. But huge news happened for the Jill Stein campaign. And I can't tell you guys just how big this is. This is a big deal because Jill Stein just recently received an endorsement from Professor Jeffrey Sachs. And I want to show that with you here. Check this out. Now, they are actually holding a rally that is this Friday at 8 p.m. ET with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Now, this is huge, and I'll get into his statement, but this is huge. And let me tell you why this is huge. Jeffrey Sachs is not someone that is shut out from mainstream media. You can find Jeffrey Sachs on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, etc., but he also appears on independent media as well. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen him on independent shows. I mean, I've seen him on Bad Faith. I've seen him on, I think he was on Breaking Points, but I've seen him on independent shows. And I think he might have been on Danny Haifong's show as well. Anyway, dude's pretty based on this. Now, check this. Number one, he's an economist. Number two, he is against the war in Gaza. Number three, he's against the war in Ukraine. Number four, he calls out the U.S. government method of spending money for other things instead of the American people. And I don't think he was always this way. I think at one point he was a little bit more, I think, towards the center. But as time has evolved, he has moved further and further and further left. So he has grown. And also, he is a professor at Columbia University, one of the Zionist institutions. And it's true what people say about Columbia. That is very true. One of the Zionist institutions. He teaches at Columbia, which is where the encampments really started to take off. that institution itself has made it very clear that they support the state of Israel. And Professor Jeffrey Sachs is against the war in Gaza. And he's been very critical about Israel. So this is a slap in the face to Colombia and the establishment and the Israeli lobby. This is not someone who is not known. People know who Jeffrey Sachs is. So let's get into the announcement here. Dr. Sachs recently endorsed, I'll make it bigger, sorry. Sometimes it looks big for me, but then when I see it on the screen, it doesn't look as large for you guys. Or maybe I messed that up. Okay, there we go. Dr. Sachs recently endorsed Jill, writing, "The true hope for foreign policy, sanity, and a fair economy is the lead peace candidate, Jill Stein. The main work for peace activists in the next few weeks is to ensure that Stein is indeed on the ballot in every state in November, despite the brazen attempts by the two major parties to keep the Green Party and peace candidates off the ballot. Please join these two powerhouse champions for people, planet, and peace to fire up the fight to get our pro-worker, anti-genocide climate action campaign on the ballot across the country." And you can sign up this way. And Eric, we can put the link in the chat so people can sign up to attend the virtual event. And again, that will be this Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So that is huge. And honestly, I don't know. And he probably expects this as well. Not sure how much longer they're going to want to keep him at Columbia after that. But he probably expects this. He probably expects that this is coming. Now, I want to show you some of the things that Jeffrey Sachs has said in reference to foreign policy here. Now, I want to start here when he actually spoke to Mark Lamont Hill. We're going to go back, him talking about the tensions in the Middle East. So let's start here so you can understand where he's coming from when it comes to foreign policy.
At the same time, we're saying, hey, you need some restraint here. The U.S. said that it wants to see these tensions de-escalate and that it wouldn't join Israel in any military retaliation against Iran. Question for me is the U.S. doing enough, though, to restrain Israel?
Probably not at some level. I think Israel will do something. It won't be helpful to anything. Israel started this round of escalation with the attack on the diplomatic compound in Damascus. Pretty brazen. I'd say more than pretty brazen, very brazen. Rather illegal, contrary to the Geneva Conventions on attacking diplomatic sites, a clear escalation, and I think clearly intended to pull the U.S. Into a war with Iran, which is probably Netanyahu's dream. I don't think that's going to work. It's a terrible idea, terrible for Israel, terrible for the United States.
And the U.S. has been pretty unequivocal about that. Biden said we're not getting pulled into a military war.
Right, and Netanyahu seems to think that he really runs the U.S. government, and sometimes it feels
not
that
always
way.
wrong. Yeah.
Exactly. Sometimes it feels that way. So he doesn't take Biden at face value in that sense. He thinks he can manipulate things or force the hand of the United States or get the U.S. to come meekly behind what Israel says, because after all, the U.S. keeps saying no red lines, ironclad commitment, and all the rest. But it's been clear this is not what the U.S. should do and what it wants to do. But Netanyahu is provoking. I do think, again, though there are some serious uncertainties about what really happened with the Iranian attack, it seems more likely than not that there was some pretty bad news for Israel in that several apparently hypersonic missiles got through and hit their targets. That's got to be absolutely alarming for Israel. So I think purely on a military calculation, this was not a good week for Israel.
Okay. So that was his conversation with Mark Lamont Hill after the attacks with Iran. Jacqueline says, does a professor with tenure mean they can't be fired easily? Yes, it does mean they can't be fired easily. However, I will say I have seen tenure professors fired. It took some time. It's not something that happened overnight, but I have seen tenure professors fired. However, they will find a way to remove him if they want to, especially the fact now that he's backing Jill Stein. That also says a lot, because the reality is that they're probably not gonna want him to remain at Columbia now that he has endorsed Jill Stein and he's doing this event with her. So you never know. But like I said, if they want to get rid of him, they'll find a way to get rid of him. And by they, I mean AIPAC, the ADL, etc. Right? He was also on Rising, and I wanted you to hear what he said about the history of Israel here.
What the stakes are as the ceasefire is attempted to be negotiated. The focus, I think rightly so, is on the exchange of hostages, but much of the framing that you see in the mainstream suggests that Hamas is being unnecessarily stubborn in giving up hostages. What is it that they see as necessary to get in return in order for such a hostage exchange to be beneficial?
There's a fundamental issue at play. And that is who rules the Palestinian lands. This is the basic issue, and it's been the basic issue for 57 years, since the 1967 war. Under international law, repeated votes of the UN Security Council and repeated votes of the UN General Assembly, there is to be a Palestinian state. The Palestinian state is to include Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This is clear, and it's been clear for more than 50 years. The Israeli government completely rejects this. This is an extremist government, ultra-extremist, ultra-right-wing, filled with biblical zealots also, who believe, well, this land was given to the Jewish people according to the book of Joshua 2,500 years ago, and we're not discussing anything else. And so this government wants to rule over 7 million Palestinian people. This has been the crux of this issue for 57 years. And talking about a ceasefire without talking about the real issue at stake here is why the U.S. government completely fails to accomplish anything. It's pathetic. But the reason is that it abides by the Israeli government, even though this is an absolutely extremist government that is completely isolated in the world and that violates international law. So either the United States decides it's not going to fund and provide the munitions for a war based on those principles, or it's going to basically enable this extremist Israeli government to try to carry out these aims. If it does the latter, which is the current approach, it just means unending war. That's all.
Okay, so that was his take here, a little bit about the history of Israel. He's also talked a lot about Ukraine as well. And another thing I want to mention about Jeffrey Sachs, for people who are not aware, he's also Jewish. So is Jill Stein. So are AIPAC and ADL and all these other organizations, are they going to call Jill Stein and Jeffrey Sachs anti-Semitic? Now, I did want to clear something up, because I think some people assume that he was announced as the VP. He's not announced as the VP. Jill Stein has not announced her running mate yet, but he has endorsed her. And for someone like Jeffrey Sachs, who's a well-known economist who has been on mainstream media multiple times, and I mean multiple times, like this guy's on TV all the time. It's very interesting that he has been the one to do the endorsement. And that makes me wonder if they're going to bring him back on some of those mainstream networks going forward. Now, that's the great news for Jill Stein's campaign. Here's the wild and crazy news. So Jill Stein, again, for those who are not aware, she was an activist before she was a politician. Also a medical professional, right? Medical doctor. Jill Stein has been participating in different actions, whether it was Cop City, whether it's been climate actions, but also, of course, the pro-Palestinian protest as well. We all know that that is something that she's been very vocal about. And again, she is Jewish, so just keep that in mind. Now, recently, just the other day, she was at Washington University in St. Louis, and Jill Stein was there on the front line with the students trying to hold the line. And I want to show you that because she was arrested And we'll get into the arrest and we'll get into her statement that was made after that. Jill Stein is right here in the crowd with the people. If you look here, you see the girl with the green bandana. And then you'll see this is Jill right next to her here. This is Jill trying to hold the line.
Hold the line now, hold the line. Hold the line. Hold the line. Hold the line now, hold the line. Hold the line now, hold the line. Hold it down for Kylie. Hold the line now, hold the line. Hold the line now, hold the line. What are you doing? Get back! Hey, you get back! You get back! What are you doing? Fastest foot! Fastest foot! Fastest foot! You get back!
So Jill Stein is still in there with this group here, right? So again, this is just another campus protest towards, for peace in Gaza. And, again, the police came in and they escalate things like they always do when they show up to these events. They're supposed to de-escalate. They don't. They escalated things. And Jill Stein is there with the protesters trying to hold the line. Now, this isn't something that Jill has done just because she's running for president. Jill Stein was an activist before she was a presidential candidate. So these are the kind of things that she's known for doing, being there on the ground with the people, right? You'll see the difference between what Jill's doing right here and what AOC did when she showed up at Columbia University. So you'll see the difference. So she was there with the people. Now that's important because Jill Stein was arrested and so was Jason Call, who's her campaign manager, along with Kelly Merrill Kyer. They were all arrested. I want to give the statement here and then you'll see the video response from Jill Stein. It says, statement on Jill Stein's arrest at Washington University in St. Louis. Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein, campaign manager Jason Call, and deputy campaign manager Kelly Merrill Kyer were arrested alongside approximately 100 others, mostly Washington University students at an encampment set up on Saturday on the university grounds. The demand from the encampment was specifically for the university to divest from Boeing, which manufactures munitions used in the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza at their nearby St. Charles facility. The Jill Stein campaign supports the demands of the students and their peaceful protests and assembly on campus. Student protests for peace and civil liberties has always been represented the best part of our collective moral consciousness. So that's the statement from Jill Stein's campaign there. And then you'll see there's a picture here. This is Jason Call. So it says jail selfies. So here's Jason here in the maroon or burgundy. I know some of you watching would say, girl, just say red. I'm a color expert. Maroon. The maroon shirt here with other protesters that were also arrested. So again, this is a presidential candidate that was arrested. And now what's interesting about this is that the police are trying to say that Jill Stein assaulted an officer. So they're trying to charge her with assault. And you cannot remove the fact that she wasn't also just there for the protest, but they're also there to organize and get ballot access. So it seems like to me, this was a direct intentional hit, not realizing that by arresting Jill Stein, they actually called more attention to Jill Stein's campaign, and it actually makes Jill appear to be more based. This is how you can tell the difference, with the police and what other people are going to see. People will look at this and we're like, oh, people who weren't aware that Jill Stein was running, they're probably aware now. So this can actually backfire against them. Now, Jill Stein did release a statement. She was released from jail here. And this is actually, she shared this on her website. It says Jill Stein released from St. Louis County Jail after arrest. Let's go ahead and get into her statement here.
Let's make Dr. Stein look great. Not gonna hurt. Whenever you like it, Sam.
Yeah, I'm just coming out of
jail, so I don't know what my hair is doing. This will be a very easy first question because I don't have to ask you to spell your first and last name or tell me what your title is because we know all that stuff. Looking good, Sam? Okay, take a breather. How long, well, I'm going to ask this as well. Let's start with this. Dr. Stein, when you're coming out, how long were you in there for? What was it like when you were in the St. Louis County Jail?
It was kind of scary, to tell you the truth, because I got separated from the rest of the crowd, you know, and it initially felt like there was a lot of safety in numbers, but then it turned out that I was being charged with assault after being assaulted by a bicycle and basically thrown onto my head backwards. I was charged with assaulting a police officer. Can you believe it? And so I got separated out, and I was alone going through this whole other process where I was going through a medical exam. I had, regular steel handcuffs put on and sat a long time sitting alone in a cell. And I had no idea, did anybody even know I was there? I had been separated from my team. And, was I going to be there all night? Was I going to be there for a week? What's going on, and when could I call my lawyer? So I was just completely led through this process, completely blind. And I'm really glad that, we got out. What time were we brought in? When did we get arrested? My guess is around 7:30, something like that, and finally got out at around 1:30 or 1:45, something like that.
So quite a long time. Obviously, you were not here to have all of this happen. You were here, as I'm assuming, to campaign, talk to people in St. Louis.
And to get on the ballot so that voters could have a choice, so that, the American public opposes the genocide, wants an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic solution. So we want to get that on the ballot. We want a pro-worker campaign to be on the ballot. We want an anti-war campaign and a climate emergency campaign. We are the only campaign that actually represents all of those issues. So we have a lot to fight for to enable the American people to have a choice, and the American people are clamoring for a choice. They don't want these two zombie candidates rammed down their throat again, and by huge majorities, Americans want other choices. So we want to provide that choice. We have to jump through all kinds of hoops for Americans to be able to exercise basic democracy in the voting booth. We have to collect, I don't know what it is, something like 10,000 signatures total in Missouri in order to get on the ballot. So if people want to be sure that you have an actual choice on the ballot, you can contact either our campaign, JillStein2024.com, or get in touch with the Missouri Green Party to help.
Let me pause here for just a second. Alexis said hopefully she can sue the police department. And I think she should, because if you look at the video, obviously they were the ones that were pushing the bike you see how the way that they threw the professor, one of the professors in another video, again, a female, the way the guy grabbed her and just threw her on the ground, so it's like, see how they twist the story and say that she was the one that was assaulting them. So it's very, very telling, guys, very, very telling. And I think that what we have to remember as well, again, Jill Stein, she's been through this before. She's protested multiple times before. Obviously, she's been arrested before. But this is to send a message. Like I said, if they're trying to silence Jill Stein's campaign, they actually just gave Jill Stein's campaign more attention. And I want you guys to pay attention to what's happening this time around. Last time Jill Stein was here, she said, notice we haven't been brought on Democracy Now! This time around. Because in reference to ballot access, they know that Jill Stein will be a threat. Last time when Jill Stein was on Democracy Now!, when she ran in 2016, they didn't realize how much of a threat she was going to be. Jill ended up getting on the ballot in over 40 states. She'll probably get closer to 50 this time around. So you don't see her on Democracy Now! I haven't seen Jill Stein on Breaking Points. If she has, let me know when I missed it, but I haven't seen her on Breaking Points. She has been on Rising. Notice how mainstream media is trying to shut her out. They brought her on CNN at the very beginning of the announcement of her campaign, but these people are not interviewing her the way they're interviewing all the other third party and independent candidates. I have yet to see Chris Cuomo bring Jill Stein on to talk to her on News Nation, but yet he's got RFK Jr. on there every time you turn around. Because they know that when it comes to ballot access, this is going to be a significant threat. So they're trying to do what they what they tried to do with Bernie Sanders, which is that they're going to try to silence her as much as possible and just not give any attention to the campaign at all. So that way people won't be paying attention, then they won't even realize that she's running. So the question is, now with what happened to Jill Stein, she got arrested and all this stuff. Are these other programs, are they going to cover her now? And if they don't, you should be suspicious of that, whether you're for Jill Stein or not. The reality is, as much as they're talking about RFK Jr., the reality is when it comes to ballot access, she has the most ballot access, and her access is only going to continue to grow. So if you're in Missouri and you want to see her on the ballot in Missouri, contact the campaign and see how you can help in reference to helping them collect signatures during those drives. That'll be a big clap back to the police who arrested her and other members of her campaign. That'll be a big clap back. But the good news is she got an endorsement from Jeffrey Sachs. That is huge news, like I said. But of course, as you know, they were arrested. And I think, again, like I said, that is giving her campaign even more attention. I would also say Jeffrey Sachs probably knows that by giving this endorsement, it probably could hurt his chances in reference to his professional career at Columbia University. He's probably well aware of that. Anthony says Sachs doing overtime to make up for his neoliberal days. I know. Todd says AOC talked a big game too before she was elected. Don't trust him. Interesting, Todd. Baby Ethernet says Jeffrey has mentioned recently that he's been blacklisted by mainstream media and it's affected him financially, but he's happy to be on independent media platforms. Yeah, I was wondering how long that was going to last. All ones the same said it only gets violent when the cops show up. Agreed. JB says, Sabs, do you think Jeffrey Sachs' endorsement of Jill Stein will force the hand of corporate media to discuss and have Dr. Stein on? I feel like at least they will be forced to talk about her thoughts. I think it could push it in that direction. I think it could. I still think they're going to try to not mention her at all. Shout out to Snork for the super chat. She is not following Obama's rule for protesting. Thank you, Cognite. Jill Stein has also been consistently pro-choice in regards to the jab, unlike PSL. JB says the police did nothing to AOC. That shows you whose side AOC's on. Dr. Stein is actually considered a threat to the system. Yeah, we're going to get into the AOC story next, and you'll see the difference. You'll see the difference. Thank you, Eliezer. Cornell, the sellout West, would never get arrested. Actually, Cornell West has been arrested multiple times before. He's been arrested at protests before. In fact, all you have to do is Google it and you can see those pictures for yourself. And thank you, Janice. RFK people going to anti-Zionist protests collecting signatures to get on the ballot. He stands against only to take advantage of the ill-informed. Yes, this is another thing. Thank you for reminding me about that, Janet. That's another thing that people have been explaining to me, that apparently RFK Jr.'s campaign actually have people going to these pro-Palestinian protests to collect signatures. And a lot of people are just not aware of RFK Jr.'s position when it comes to Israel and Gaza, because it just hasn't been spread mainstream yet. A lot of people are really unaware. So just FYI. And thank you, baby Ethernet. Biden would never. Remember, he lied about getting arrested in South Africa? He supports apartheid, South Africa and Israel alike. Well said, baby Ethernet. Such an interesting name. Baby Ethernet. Go ahead and smash that like button, guys, if you haven't had a chance to do so. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. And we are moving on to the next story. When we talk about building movements, when we talk about protests, we have to be very careful who we build a coalition with. We have to be very careful of the types of relationships that we choose to cultivate. Oftentimes, when you see Democrat politicians appear at movement, protest, or rallies, this is not just to help you. This is usually to help their self or the party or to co-opt your movement. I say this because AOC just recently made a visit to Columbia University encampment. And I want you to see the difference between what happens in this video with AOC and the way that Jill Stein was treated, right, at the protest at Washington University. The police are not going to target AOC because they know that she's not a threat to the system, just like JB was saying. So that's really important to note. But in comes the Democratic Party to try to co-opt the movement. Check this out.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming out here. It's great the support we're getting.
Just pausing that there because of music. And I'll play it when she starts to speak. So here she is at the encampment. Let me go ahead and play it here.
So I'm a freelancer with New York Times.
Yeah, she's not saying too much. Hold on. Yeah, so she's not saying too much, but there she is at the Columbia University encampment. And it wasn't just her. There were other members of the squad that appeared there as well. So here she is walking through, and they're kind of escorting her through here. And we're just going to pause right about here because I want to pause. So you see there's the cameras, people are filming her, etc. Okay. So let me tell you what this is really about. Because you see, she's trying to play both sides. This is what I told you about her, right? Like she tries to play the progressive lane, but she also tries to fit in with Democrat leadership. You can't both sides of genocide. So this time it's very, it's a little bit more obvious. And to the people that are participating in these protests, I would caution you from welcoming politicians into your direct action. We saw this happen with the BLM movement, where they get involved in these movements and they co-opt them and they water them down. That's what happened with BLM. It's happened with other potential movements across this country as well. Some would say it also happened in reference to the Vietnam War protests. You cannot allow them to come in. AOC is not there to show support. Don't get it twisted. AOC is there to also get votes for Joe Biden. Why is she there? After the speeches that she gave about whether or not you should support Joe Biden if you're against the genocide in Gaza. She is there to convince the young people to vote for Joe. She is not just there to tell you she appreciates what you guys are doing. And this is where you have to be very careful. This is why you cannot let them come in. What happened when she appeared at the Amazon labor things after she ghosted them on the first one? Said she would be there, didn't show up. Then she finally showed up after they won. Right? So those movements have been watered down. Now you see that she's made her way into the protests that are happening, calling out the genocide in Gaza. I would have no problem with politicians participating in these movements if they haven't been known to co-opt them, which is what they do. The Democratic Party co-opted the BLM movement. They co-opted and watered down defund the police, then turned on it and said it was toxic. And people didn't get anything at the end. They didn't get anything on a national level from all the protests. So don't get it twisted. She is there to tell those people, I totally get what you're doing and you're great to organize this. And I support your effort to protest. But when November comes, you have to support Joe Biden because we can't get Donald Trump. Remember, Joe Biden is losing the young base. He's lost support among the younger voters. That is why AOC is there. We cannot be fooled by this. Especially when you see the pictures that she took just a couple days ago. Nico called this out. Shout out to Nico. Hey, real quick. or let me say it like Nico. Hey, bruh, real quick. This you with Genocide Joe, who called the Columbia protesters anti-Semitic right after you gave a speech showing support to those same protesters. Pick a side, bruh. I added in the bruh, but Nico would say that. So you can't have it both ways. And this is what they've been doing. So here she is with Joe Biden and Ed Markey. Now start asking these questions, folks. Out of all the members of the squad, how is it that she gets to be that close to Joe Biden? How is it that AOC gets to be that cozy with Joe Biden? She's not the only member of the squad. So start asking those questions. This is AOC looking out for her political career. Ed Markey too. They all got on the same glass. What is this? So they all have on the aviator glasses. You see this? So she wants to have it both ways. And you can't. Now I want to show you this. This interview that AOC had with Mehdi Hassan. What do you say to the young people who do not want to vote for Joe Biden because of the genocide in Gaza? This interview with Mehdi Hassan occurred before she showed up to Columbia University. I want to show you this so that you understand her intentions. Listen to this.
What do you say to a young progressive or an Arab American who says to you, I just can't vote for Biden again after what he's enabled in Gaza? What do you say to them?
I mean, I think everyone comes to this prospect and this conversation with a different history, different background, what they bring. You know, for an individual Palestinian American that has had their family killed, there is nothing. I mean, I am not here to lecture anyone. I also think that this election is more, in my personal view, I believe this election is about more than president. And also, it's not just one election that's happening. We're having hundreds of elections.
Yes.
The balance of Congress, the balance of the House, the balance of the Senate, and the presidency. And I have a vested interest in protecting democracy, not just here domestically, but globally.
What AOC is telling Palestinians who have lost their family members in Gaza, she's telling them that her vested interest is in protecting democracy. I'll add to that what she will not say, but also protecting her political career. That is more important than pushing back on a genocide. Let me just ring this clear, folks. You have third party and independent candidates that are running, and they are against the genocide that is happening in Gaza. And these are people I'm talking about that have been correct on the Israel-Gaza issue for years, not after October 7th, not Johnny-come-latelys. And AOC, who calls herself a progressive, she wants to call out the genocide and only decided to do so after protesters pushed her to do that. She wants to call out the genocide and say it's wrong and we shouldn't support what's happening in Gaza. But then she also wants to turn around and tell you that democracy is important, so we should support Joe Biden. She wants you to support the genocider, the person supplying the weapons, the person giving Israel the tools to continue to slaughter Palestinians abroad. Now, I want you to think about that for just a second, folks. Then she has the audacity to appear at Columbia University as if she's down with the fight, down with the struggle. She is not down with the fight. She is not down with the struggle. She is there to co-opt your movement and to convince you to support Joe Biden and the Dem establishment and to keep you from moving further to the left and becoming a radical. People like AOC are there to prevent any type of revolution. You have to understand. This is something that we've learned from the Black Panthers. If you study the Black Panthers, they would have warned you about people like AOC. Bernie Sanders. They are there to maintain the status quo. Now, they will call out the Democratic Party for certain things. But at the end of the day, if they still tell you to maintain that status quo, what good are they? They're never going to push you outside of the lines. They offer you theater, but they're not delivering any type of radical politics. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine if you had a friend and your friend told you that they were abused. They were physically abused by their partner. So they're in an abusive relationship. And you tell your friend that you are against any type of domestic violence. You are against it. That is a no-no. But then you turn around and you tell your friend you need to stay with him anyway because you're better off having a spouse than being alone. Think about that. Would you want the friend that's going to tell you to stay in the abusive situation, or would you want the friend that's going to tell you to pack your stuff and leave? I would want the friend to say leave. Let's continue.
And it isn't, I truly do not believe this as a lesser of two evils type of situation. I think about what conditions do I want to be organizing under in the next 4 years. Yeah. We can look at both of these individuals oppositionally as well, depending on what issue you have. But I would rather, even in places of stark disagreement, I would rather be organizing under the conditions of Biden as an opponent on an issue than Trump, who is not, he seeks to dismantle American democracy.
Now we've moved on to democracy instead of focus on the genocide that is happening in Gaza. You see what I'm saying? You know, it's like you have a whole population of people being slaughtered, but you want to focus on somebody trying to dismantle democracy. How can you dismantle something that we don't truly have, AOC? We don't have a democracy when you're kicking people off the ballot. We don't have a democracy where you're not even allowing people to debate. We don't have a democracy when you have mainstream media telling you very early on who the nominee is going to be and not giving anyone else a chance. We don't have a democracy when the DNC tells you they are a corporation and they can pick whoever they want to be the nominee. You don't have a democracy when you have a DNC fraud lawsuit. So how can you dismantle something that you don't even truly have? Now, she can't say what I just said. If she tells you what I just said, she wouldn't be sitting up on that stage. She damn sure wouldn't be in that picture with Joe Biden. So AOC has to make a decision. You need to decide if you want to be Nancy Pelosi, which I think that's what she wants, or if you actually want to stand for something for once. And the latter may mean that you will not be a politician.
And I am taking that personally very seriously, because we will not be able to organize for any movement towards anything if we are facing the jailing of dissidents. I mean, this is the kind of authoritarianism that he threatens. Fascism. And we have to take it seriously.
She's talking about the jailing, right? Who is throwing people in jail right now? Isn't that happening under Joe Biden? Aren't the protesters being thrown in jail? This is under Biden's presidency. When it comes to the police, are Donald Trump and Joe Biden that much different? When Joe Biden is funding the police, he's giving the police more money than Donald Trump. They both want to fund the police. They both support the police state. This is why some people, look, let me keep it real, because some of you are new here. This is why some people, they don't want to have me have this discussion. This is why some people, you'll never see me on their show, You'll never see people from RBN, my comrades at RBN, on their show because they don't want you to hear what I just told you. At the end of the day, both political parties support the police state. Neither one of them really want protests. Don't get it twisted. Nico broke this down so beautifully. The hypocrisy, the audacity of it all.
Wow, I'm really impressed. AOC actually gave a speech in solidarity with the protesters of Columbia University and other universities across the country.
It is especially important that we remember the power of young people shaping this country today, of all days, as we once again witness the leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
Now look, I know I've had my criticisms about AOC, but I truly think it's dope that... Hold on. Is that a picture of AOC and Joe Biden? Hold on, was this picture taken the same day as the speech with her showing solidarity with the university protesters? Nah, bruh. Is she wearing the exact same shirt that she just gave a speech in? So after AOC gave this speech celebrating the peaceful protesters of Columbia University, she took a picture with Joe Biden, who literally condemned those very same protests as anti-Semitic. But you know what? I'm not even surprised. This is AOC. This is the same AOC that admitted that the United States is funding a genocide and then turned around and said, well, we have to vote for Joe Biden though, because we have a responsibility to uphold democracy domestically and around the world. Those were her words. But apparently AOC's idea of supporting democracy around the world is voting for a president who is actively funding an apartheid state. We got two different definitions of democracy, bro. Y'all gotta find a way to get her up out of there, bro. She cannot keep getting away with this.
That was Nico there for another hot spot clip. You guys, they're killing it. Nico and Nick are killing it with those hot spot clips. Make sure you follow Hotspot on Twitter because they're doing the damn thing. But it's true. Like, what else can you say, right? Even one of the Columbia protesters who organized the encampment, even he called AOC out. Check it out, folks. Columbia protest organizers, Kimani James, takes aims at AOC amid backlash. Oh, no. One of the leading figures in the protest against the war in Gaza at Columbia, who caused controversy, and we'll skip what he said there, but he was saying something about caused controversy, saying that he said Zionists didn't deserve to live. I don't agree with that type of rhetoric there. I don't agree saying anyone doesn't deserve to live. So we got to say that, making that very clear, YouTube. Anywho, it goes on here, has a hit out on New York Congresswoman AOC for visiting the encampment. Kamami says, where am I here? 20 reshared a post on X, formerly Twitter, which criticized AOC after she and other members of the progressive Democratic group known as the Squad visited the pro-Palestinian campus protest on Friday. This is what he said. If you're letting in politicians to your encampment who condemn the Palestinian resistance and endorse Genocide Joe, you have fully lost the plot. Encampments should sites of resistance, not Democratic Party photo ops. Beware of co-optation. And we have to be very careful about that. So he was one of the organizers. And he's trying to say, what is happening here? Why are you guys taking pictures with AOC? Why are you welcoming her in with open arms? This woman just told you she is supporting and endorsing Genocide Joe. She is really against what she's fighting for. Here's the thing. Look at the actions, folks. If you tell me you condemn a genocide, but then at the same time, you give an announcement and you say you fully endorse President Joe Biden, the one who's actually allowing the genocide to happen, allowing the genocide to happen, then you're full of shit. How are you going to be against what? And I don't care. I don't want to hear, well, Donald Trump is so much scarier, yada, yada. I don't want to hear it. Because if you are against genocide, you cannot sit up here and support the person that is allowing the genocide to happen in the first place. The U.S. could call an end to this immediately by announcing they are not funding Israel. Immediately by calling for a permanent, everlasting ceasefire. Immediately. So don't give me that I would rather work under Joe Biden because we could get like a true democracy thing going here. No, you would rather work under Joe Biden because you want to have a political career in Congress, possibly later in the Senate, and then later on you want to run for president. Get out of here. Everybody has to call this out. I once supported AOC too. I once supported Bernie and the squad too. But these people failed us. They turned their backs on us and they need to be called out for it. And you cannot allow yourself to fall in for this trap again. It is only April, but as we get closer to November, they are going to hype this up even more. Ilhan Omar's very daughter was arrested for participating in the protest. She's still out here tap dancing like a damn clown. After Joe Biden was dropping drones on people in her own damn country. And she's still out here shining Joe Biden's shoes. Wake up, people. You are never going to get any type of real change in this country as long as you allow the corporate powers that be, the status quo, tell you to just take a step back. Not now, maybe later. Why don't you wait until Trump's not a threat? I've heard that all my life. And some of you watching have too. You know how long I've had people say, don't try to do that right now. Why don't you just wait till next year? Wait a couple years down the road. And if I would have listened to those people, I wouldn't be where I am today. There will always be those voices that are going to try to hold back any type of progress in this country. And you need to start asking yourself, why are they doing that? What's in it for them? How much are they being paid? And who is paying them under the table to prevent any type of progress in this country? Some of the same politicians that sit up there and they tell you that they are for defunding the police, they got pictures of them having dinner with cops, okay? Who they rubbing elbows with in DC when they're not getting their picture taken? That's what you got to pay attention to. So AOC has been coached. She's been in Congress long enough now to know what to say, to convince whatever's left of her whack ass base that she's still so much progressive, but to also convince the Democrat leadership that she's not going to stab them in the back. And if you don't think that they don't get approval, squad members don't get approval to vote the way that they do against something from Dem leadership, you're a fool. And that is why you never see them vote against something when it's actually going to make a difference in whether or not the legislation is going to pass. I was not born yesterday. I was not born last night. But these politicians, they have a way of trying to fool you. They know how to talk. They know what to say to get you to think they're on your side. But you have to look at their behavior. And I don't give a damn if you liked AOC before or not. The woman is not for you. She is not there to help you. She's there to help herself. Let's go to some of the comments here. Sorry, I got hype there. It pisses me off. It really pisses me off. Thank you, Soccer Pepper. Sachs still repeats the two-state myth. And one of the Chicago boys that brought shock therapy to Russia. Let's not get too excited about him for now. That's a good point, Soccer Pepper. Janice says they're trying to co-opt a movement they have actively, voted against. They vote to fund Israel. I think you meant Israel there. Yeah, I think you meant Israel. Thank you, Andre. Didn't Biden call the protests anti-Semitic? Yes, he did. Rich says, OJs, what they do, smile in your face all the time. They want to, oh yeah, they smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place. Backstabbers, backstabbers, the OJs. Javier says, remember Sabby? She worked for Ted Kennedy. Yes. Yes, she did. Thank you, Katrina. But the USA can use NGOs to create color revolution in Hong Kong, Ukraine, etc. Sachs is fantastic. MSN, ignore him now after his viral CNBC appearance. He goes on the Duran pod quite often. Oh yeah, the Duran. I've seen those guys before. Thank you, Stop Sniffing Kids, Joe. Stop Sniffing Kids is the most unique name on the internet. I will say it is. Aunt Shawnee says, you are 100% correct. My uncle was James York of the Black Panther. Oh, I didn't know that. Of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Movement, who the government put in prison. I thought he died 3 years ago. Yeah, they would warn you about people like AOC. Thank you for this as well. Stop Sniffing Kids. The right and the left need to come together and create a new government. I think a lot of people need to get together and buy some land and just create our own town. Be Easy says AOC is unfortunately turning into a DEI figure for the DNC. Isn't it crazy, Be Easy? Isn't it crazy? Thank you, Troy. Sing it with me, Sabby. They smile in your face. They smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place. Backstabbers. Backstabbers. If you're young in the chat, actually, they weren't around when I wasn't around when they were born either, or when they were playing. But my parents used to play the OJs. So some of you might remember your parents playing the OJs. Thank you for the super chat, Andre. It's not a binary issue for me. At the very least, they should be clamoring to get Biden to step down if they want to save democracy and have a Dem. That's an interesting point there, Andre. Thank you for the super sticker, Trash Panda. And thank you, Observe Scribe. Serious deep truth seekers encouraged to find/try. The Masters in the Path by C.W. Leadbeater, 1925, or Ledbetter. PDF or any by Alice A. Bailey or Benjamin Cream. Thank you for that. All right. So we got fired up there a little bit. Now we're going to bring it back just a tad. Now we're going to go back, way back. We are going to go into this conversation here with Don Lemon and Breaking Point. So if you want to laugh, now's a good time to get ready to get your laugh on. Okay. Go ahead and smash that like button if you haven't had a chance to do so. And we're going to go ahead and dive into this story here. So believe it or not, Don Lemon actually did have an appearance on Breaking Points with Ryan Grimm. And I forget her name. I'm sorry. Emily. Yes. With Ryan Grimm and Emily. There are two parts during this conversation that I do want to touch on. The first part we're going to talk about is whether or not CNN actually covered the Bernie Sanders campaign properly. And I think what you're going to define from this conversation is that Don Lemon, he may have left CNN, but the CNN is still in Don Lemon. Let's go ahead and get started here with Don Lemon on Breaking Points.
So one of the criticisms I had of CNN over the years is around its coverage of the kind of left wing of the Democratic Party, and in particular, missing the kind of the energy behind the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, and then missing it again the second time around. 2020, Bernie Sanders almost seized the nomination. And it seemed to catch the media flat-footed both times. I'm curious what your editorial meetings were like throughout 2016 and 2020, or was there just so much Trump that there just wasn't kind of the oxygen for the Democratic primaries?
In other words, Ryan is asking Don Lemon, why is it that CNN decided to suppress Bernie Sanders campaigns both times?
I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, Brian. What are you asking me that you think that Bernie Sanders wasn't given his due in traditional media? Is that what you're saying?
And let me tell you a little story about that real quick. Like, so in February of 2020, you remember Rebecca Cutler, the old head of CNN talent? She reached out to, or somehow we got connected. I went back, I was still at The Intercept, but I was at The Intercept at the time. And she said, look, we have really missed the boat on covering the left wing of the Democratic Party. Like, we need people who have covered that before and who understand this rising progressive energy. And so CNN brought me in and said, look, we need to get you on some of these programs because we need somebody, who can speak to this obviously now rising energy within the Democratic Party. And then that happened a couple times. And then Bernie lost the South Carolina primary and got wiped out on Super Tuesday. And they said, actually, never mind, we're good. Like, we don't need to worry about this kind of progressive wing. Maybe in 4 years if it bubbles back up. But there was a fear inside CNN reflected through Rebecca's outreach that they had missed something fundamental about the country that was represented by the rise of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know what conversation you had with Rebecca, who I know, and so I won't get into that. But I think if there was any outreach for you to cover something that was happening in the news or the zeitgeist politically, I think that Rebecca should be commended for recognizing that. The second part is that I've never heard anybody say that CNN should be more left. So, hey, there's a first time for everything. I didn't necessarily think CNN was left. I thought that CNN was about facts. I think CNN has the best journalists in the world.
So this is Don Lemon's moment here to defend and kiss up to the network that fired him. And some of you may be wondering, why would he do that? It's quite simple. You don't want to burn bridges, they say. Also, there's the possibility that he could also end up back at CNN at some point. You never know, talking about years down the line. But also, Don Lemon still wants to maintain access to people that he still knows that works at CNN, and also some of the networks that he's created along the way, networking with different people. So it's kind of like he's not going to burn his bridges, because he knows that now that he's independent media, he still wants to be able to get some of those people from CNN to come onto his independent show. Same thing with Mehdi Hasan when he had the interview with Crystal and Kyle. He didn't want to throw MSNBC completely under the bus, because he still wants to maintain access to certain people and certain things. So here goes Don Lemon trying to basically defend CNN at all costs. The reality is, we all know that not just CNN, but all of mainstream media, yes, they did try to suppress Bernie Sanders' campaign as much as possible. And while I have my criticisms about Bernie Sanders today, and I absolutely regret donating all the money that I did to Bernie Sanders, if I could do it all over again, I would have given that money to mutual aid. I would have given that money to people who put it directly in their hand, not to Bernie Sanders, not to a presidential campaign. That being said, you cannot deny the movement that was created around the Bernie campaigns at that point in time. And so for CNN to pretend like this was not happening, yes, they were actively suppressing the campaign, but Don Lemon isn't going to admit that.
But I also think you asked me what my editorial meetings were like. I mean, no one was trying to push Bernie Sanders, and at least in my editorial meetings, and I would venture to speak for the network now. Well, I'll speak for myself. I don't think that anyone was trying to push Bernie Sanders out. I think that Bernie Sanders may have had sort of outsized influence with a certain segment of the Democratic Party, but all polls in 2016 pointed to Hillary Clinton.
Pause. So basically what Don Lemon is telling you is that they're going to put their attention on the candidates that are polling the highest, right? All right. So let me go ahead and tell you why he's lying. If we want to look at, let's go to the 2020 Bernie 2020 campaign. There were multiple times during the Democratic primary campaign in 2020 where Bernie Sanders was polling number one. CNN in the beginning, they did discuss him. They discussed him in a negative way. And then they saw that didn't work. So then they decided to basically just ignore the campaign altogether to see if that would work. Then Bernie Sanders had a heart attack and then he started polling well again. So there was always the attempt to suppress and to try to bury the campaign as much as possible. The other point that he made there, and he said, well, he represented a certain left segment of the Democratic Party. So Don Lemon feels since that segment of the Democratic Party wasn't large enough, there shouldn't have been much focus there. However, here's the part that Don Lemon is omitting, and that is the fact that there were a number of registered independents that also supported Bernie Sanders' campaign. There were people that voted for Donald Trump that supported Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. So he's pretending like the only people who were supporting Bernie Sanders were people who were Democrats, and that is honestly not the case. For those of us who were on the ground, we know better.
Polls in 2020 and public sentiment pointed to Joe Biden. And so what was shocking, I think, to myself was the reaction from Democrats to the nomination of Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders in 16, especially in 2020. You know, I couldn't get to gauge it because I didn't get to go to the conventions. I think that was around, because of COVID. But here's the shocking thing. So networks have editorial calls or meetings with campaigns, right, to figure out how you're going to cover the campaigns. In my experience, having those editorial calls and meetings with the Trump folks, they knew every single thing that was happening in the meeting. Every single thing that Don Lemon had ever said about Donald Trump, his folks knew about it. They knew where to place him. They knew who they wanted him to talk to. They knew who they wanted him to call into or do in-person interviews. By contrast, the Clinton campaign was so above it that, hey, they had no idea what I was saying about Hillary Clinton or whatever they were, she did not have as much media outreach. She got to pick and choose where she went, and rather than just doing what Donald Trump did. So listen, I think that the Hillary, but yet and still, the public wanted Hillary Clinton. They didn't want Bernie Sanders. So I say that to say, when after all of, Republicans did not love Donald Trump. They held their nose and they voted for him.
Let's just pause here for a second. When he says that people didn't want Bernie Sanders, they wanted Hillary Clinton. Didn't Bernie Sanders win every county in West Virginia, and the DNC decided to give those delegates to Hillary Clinton anyway? Isn't that one of the reasons why there was a DNC fraud lawsuit? I actually interviewed the lawyers for that lawsuit on this show last year. So, he's going to forget that there's super delegates and how the super delegates, yes, they did cheat Bernie Sanders in 2016. That was messed up. So he's just going to pretend like that didn't happen. You can leave CNN, but the CNN don't leave you.
The never Trumpers, all of the people, from Ted Cruz on down. When he became the nominee, everyone got behind him. When we were at the convention, it was Trump, 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 Trump. It wasn't Jeb. It wasn't, Cruz. It wasn't Rubio. It wasn't any of those people. By the time we got to the Democratic convention and Hillary Clinton was a nominee, people were yelling, Bernie, Bernie. And we were like, what the hell is going on? So I think that Bernie Sanders, that wing of the Democratic Party actually did as much, if not more damage to Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump.
So here's Don Lemon repeating mainstream media talking points and blaming the voters. Those of you that supported Bernie Sanders, you actually did more damage to Hillary Clinton. Okay. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Does everybody forget this? Has Don forgotten this? Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. The majority of Americans voted for Hillary Clinton. The only person who damaged Hillary Clinton's campaign was Hillary. She's the one that chose not to campaign in the Rust Belt. She's the one that called Trump supporters deplorables. What? I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact that she ignored a certain segment of the population that she felt wasn't educated enough or important enough to understand her campaign. Maybe that has something to do with it. But he's blaming the voters, folks.
So look,
but I think that's an interesting question to be asking, to say what.
I think Bernie Sanders is a fantastic politician. But I do think that there is a lesson in it for Democrats that you have to get behind the person who is the actual nominee, and you cannot have sour grapes over the person who did not become the nominee.
You have to get behind the person who's the nominee. Again, first of all, you don't have to do anything. 2, he's just going to forget the fact of the DNC fraud lawsuit, forgetting superdelegates. 3, this is Don Lemon letting you know that he's totally fine with the DNC picking the candidate. And then 4, he's ignoring the fact that some of the people that supported Bernie Sanders in the Dem primary were not Democrats. Bernie Sanders actually did really well among independents, not just in 2016, but also in 2020. Woo!
That's how the process worked. So I know that people are upset, and they're upset about the progressive wing, and they don't think it gets covered enough. But this is where we are. The nominee or the person is Joe Biden. The nominee or the person then was Hillary Clinton. I think the Bernie Sanders progressive wing of the party should have gotten behind them. And that's the reason, one of the reasons, the main reasons that we're in the predicament that we are now and that we had a Trump presidency.
No, there were a number of people that supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 that did turn around and support Hillary Clinton in the general election. You don't know what you're talking about, Don. Don Lemon is not on the street with the people. This is a big part of the problem. You're not on the ground with the people. You guys go to a fancy studio and you read a teleprompter. So there's that. And by on the ground, I don't mean you went to the convention. I'm talking about talking to the people on the ground who were supporting those candidates at that point in time. So there's that. Like, I don't even know what to say here. All those years on mainstream media, and even after getting fired from mainstream media, and you got fired from the network whose ratings are in the toilet, and they can continue to tank, by the way, and you have learned nothing from any of this.
But I guess the point would be, if CNN anchors are at the 2016 convention saying, what the hell is going on? That's kind of reflective of the point that I was making, that you guys should have seen this coming and should have known what was going on, where was this anger coming from?
Just because we're realistic about who the nominee is, doesn't mean that we didn't see it coming. Bernie Sanders was not going to win. Bernie Sanders was not going to be the nominee. So I turned to my producer and said that I'm not saying this on the air, but maybe I did say it on the air. I was surprised because Republicans fall in line. Democrats fight each other. Democrats usually wet the bed. I'm sorry. Bernie Sanders was not the nominee, nor was he ever going to become the nominee.
So you see this? And I told you before, people like Don Lemon, the reason why they were even on CNN is because they maintained the status quo. That's why. You hear this? So because someone was not going to, you didn't think they were going to win. And I argue against that, actually. I look back at 2016 and I honestly think Bernie Sanders could have beaten Donald Trump. I honestly think so. So the question that should be asked here, and I feel like Ryan did not push back enough. The question that should be asked here is, well, Don, do you think it's okay that the DNC can actually choose the nominee? Do you think that's okay, Don? Don, do you think it's okay that there was a DNC fraud lawsuit because they cheated Bernie Sanders in 2016? Why is Ryan Grimm not asking those questions? Is he afraid that Don Lemon won't come back onto Breaking Points again if he does? Even if he does, so what?
And I know that people are upset by it, but that's the truth. It's the same thing for Republicans. Nikki Haley is not the nominee. She's not going to become the nominee. Donald Trump is a nominee, regardless if you like it or not. The guy's in court. And guess what? Republicans are going to fall in line.
Nikki Haley was not a good example because when we looked at the primary, the Republican primary, the majority of people voting for Nikki Haley were not registered Republican voters. So that is a bad example.
And if becomes the president again, it'll be because Republicans fell in line.
One of the things I think is cool about, like, Ryan and I have both been critical of you. You've probably been critical of independent media. This is the first time we've ever talked in the past. But one thing that I considered a low point, honestly, in media coverage of Donald Trump was the segment with you and Rick Wilson talking about credulous boomer rubes. And I wonder, honestly, if there's an argument that sort of seeing other Americans through that lens, and maybe now in independent media, it's easier not to, but seeing other people through that lens of, credulous boomer rubes, laughing at
Rick Wilson about that was not my assessment of that. I was laughing at the Ukraine on a map thing. That was my point. I did not make any comments about Americans. So you'll have to talk to Rick Wilson about that.
But I guess there's an interesting mirror going on where the Trump supporters see that clip and they
Trump
feel
used it in the map.
Yeah, and they feel like they're not being represented. Bernie people feel like they're not being represented on CNN. And to the point about the polling that you mentioned, just one point on Joe Biden's polling. Joe Biden was not polling ahead. You had said that Joe Biden was polling ahead. Joe Biden was in the toilet the entire time. He finished 4th in Iowa, 5th in New Hampshire, got annihilated in Nevada.
We got to the convention.
Yeah, and then he won after $175 million in free media between Nevada and South Carolina, and then he wins Super Tuesday and he won the nomination, no doubt about it. But he wasn't polling ahead before that.
Let me chime in here. The point there, and I think Ryan could have made this a little bit stronger. The point that he's making there is that the entire time that Bernie Sanders was polling number one and he was winning those primary states in 2020, CNN was not covering Bernie Sanders in a favorable way. They actually covered it in reference to him being, oh, this is scary. This could be terrible. This is not working out the way that we wanted it to. I mean, come on, guys. Like, we all saw this in real time. So the point that Don Lemon made when he said that, well, the person who was going to win, the person who was polling high, that's the person who we're going to cover. Before South Carolina, Joe Biden lost every primary state. And Bernie Sanders was winning those states. And when CNN did cover Bernie Sanders, they covered him in a negative way. And they never gave him as much coverage as they did after Joe Biden won South Carolina. That is the point that Ryan is trying to make there to Don Lemon. Now, we're going to move on to another segment of this interview here. Social media's effect on cable news. Did I want to go to that one? I wanted to go to, is CNN biased? This part right about here. We'll see.
Part of this kind of left wing of observers who was saying mainstream media needs to drop this like fake objectivity, this view from nowhere, this view from God, and acknowledge that they have biases and speak from that perspective and earn trust that way. That was a very commonly held view, for many years on the left. And then CNN and put aside MSNBC, CNN really did that during the Trump administration. And I remember agreeing with a lot of what CNN was saying, disagreeing with the decent amount of it, particularly the endless focus on Russia. But I also remember thinking, whoa, that's a little bit much. You guys are starting to sound like kind of a Democratic mouthpiece. And I also recognize, like, they're doing kind of what I asked them to do for years, but now that they're doing it, not so sure I like it. And I'm curious what it was like for you to be involved in that.
You're biased, Ryan.
Well, I am. I am.
So, yeah. Listen, I don't like that. I don't believe in that I don't believe in the premise of listen, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I don't agree with the premise of what you're saying and when people put it in that context. Because listen, we all view life through a certain lens, whether we're journalists or not, whether you're a woman, a man, black, white, Jewish, Palestinian, whatever. We all view the world through our own lenses. And it is okay to be a journalist and to have a point of view. That's okay. It is actually okay to be a journalist and have an opinion. There's opinion journalism.
Pause. Let's chime in here for a second. Yes, we do view the world in our own view, but all of us don't have shareholders invested in our network that want us to present a particular narrative that follows the State Department. Because if you look at BlackRock, if you look at Vanguard Group, if you look at State Street Corporation, these are companies that are shareholders in a lot of these media networks. And you don't become a shareholder of media without getting something in return or something out of it for you or some type of narrative that you want pushed. This is no secret. Don Lemon knows that there's a certain narrative that they can share. He knows there are certain things that they can discuss and certain things they can't. At the very beginning of this interview, he admitted that himself. There were stories that he wanted to cover, and they told him he couldn't cover it because they said these weren't big enough stories, right? And he said he had a little bit more editorial freedom than other shows on CNN because his was the evening show at that point in time. So we can't sit here and pretend like there isn't money and corruption that is involved and deeply embedded in mainstream media. And that is why they have the talking points that they have. Now, you'll even catch this with some independent media nowadays, too. Not necessarily because they're shareholders, but because they want access to certain people. And the reality is, most of the people that are to the left of these so-called progressives in the House, to the left of the squad, to the left of Bernie Sanders, most of us are not given that access. Okay? So let's just keep it real. Because if this show with Ryan and Emily were to the left of Bernie Sanders and they said the things that I say on this show, Don Lemon wouldn't even be on that show. They like to protect the status quo.
So I don't believe in that BS about, journalists just have to sit there and go, what do you think? What do you think? Okay, fine. That's not how it works. I think that, I said you were engaged. I think that when that was the zenith, I believe, of CNN during that time. And it may have looked, I think, that we had moved to the left or that, we were somehow becoming an arm of the Democratic Party. That was only because of the Republican side and mostly Donald Trump and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. The facts were not on their side. So by the simple fact of pointing out that someone is lying, that you're getting misinformation, it may make people think that, oh my God, you must be on the Democrat side. No, you're on the side of truth.
No. If you were on the side of truth, then I'm sure you would have covered Joe Biden in the same respect that you covered Donald Trump, especially when we talk about allegations and accusations, John, against the two of them. Let's cut the BS. CNN, yes, obviously was an arm of the Democratic Party, just like Fox News is an arm of the Republican Party. Who does Don think he's trying to fool in this interview? So here he is explaining to Emily and Ryan that, well, the truth and the facts just happen to be on the side of the Democratic Party. Really? Really? Isn't Joe Biden out there calling the protesters anti-Semitic right now? Hasn't the Democratic Party, the Biden administration, been caught lying about Israel? Haven't all these people, they're all liars. They're all liars. Just admit it. We all know how this works. CNN supports the Democratic Party in their narrative. Fox News supports the Republican Party in their narrative. There's no shame in admitting that. That was the network that you worked for. You were a part of it. You had no problem when you were getting paid by CNN. And CNN, these guys were making a lot of money. Don Lemon is like $1 million. This guy's a millionaire. Okay? So the reality is he doesn't want to tell the truth about CNN because Don Lemon, even though he's still not working there, he still wants to be able to maintain those professional circles that he established because he was a part of CNN. I know how this works. And he still wants to maintain access to some of the people. This is a hot mess.
I know we have to wrap, but the Russia coverage was not great.
The Russia coverage was not great from Who? From anyone? The Russia coverage wasn't great from anybody.
CNN, from corporate media. Yeah, I mean, just the question about Donald Trump didn't have facts on his side.
I actually think that the Russia coverage on CNN was good. I think the Russia coverage in the media was good. I don't think that it was bad. You may disagree with it. That's your bias. But I actually think the coverage was good. And I think that people are smart enough to discern what's true and what's not, what's real and what's not. And
you guys pushed Russiagate. You guys actually believed in Russiagate. Like, it's just the lies and the lies.
So I don't think that the coverage was that bad. I don't fall into that category. And I think people I think people sort of romanticize the time that we were in. Like, people romanticize, COVID and the protocols that were in place, and this was bad and that was bad. They don't remember the time that we were in. And so, I think that the media did the best job that they could at the time. I don't think that it was terrible. We can always look back, from being an armchair quarterback, Monday morning quarterback, and saying, oh, you should have done this, shoulda, woulda, coulda. We didn't. And again, my advice, accept things the way that they are, learn your lesson, and move on.
Yeah. Now, this is something I feel like Ryan and Emily also could have pushed back on. Thank you so much for that, Lance. CNN having the IDF overlook their Gaza coverage was the nail in the coffin for CNN. Exactly. Ryan and Emily didn't push back on it. Very interesting. You have recent examples that you can mention to push back there. But again, they're not going to be too harsh on Don Lemon because they still want Don Lemon to come back on the show. Let's give it up, folks. It is what it is. It is what it is. But for him to say that CNN did great coverage considering the time that they were in, nah, man. No, because it's not even just about during the pandemic. You were lying before the pandemic too, bro. You've been lying for years. And then you would get people taking their time and covering things in such a way during that time and actually doing an excellent job on that. All you had to do was turn to investigative journalism. All you had to do was turn to independent media who were actually debunking your lies, Don. All you had to do was turn to people like the Gray Zone, Electric Intifada, right? All you had to do was to turn to people who were actually doing real investigative journalism. You could have looked at Seymour Hersh, people who were actually on the ground, people who covered both sides of the perspective and included important information that your network left out, Don. So I understand you got to continue to kiss their ass so that you can still get access. But at the end of the day, don't try to sit up there and say that you guys did phenomenal coverage because you did not. It's such a mess. It's such a mess. And Ryan Grimm knows better. Ryan knows better. For him, like sitting there, remember, he's the DC bureau chief for The Intercept. So he still want to maintain his access to politicians in DC. Access, access, access. That's what it's all about. What a joke. What a joke. If you are going to bring people on, if you're going to bring on Mehdi Hasan, and if you are going to interview Don Lemon and you don't push back, especially he interrupted you a couple times throughout this interview, you don't push back on the bullshit, I'm looking at you with a side eye. All right. Let's go to some of the comments here. Thank you, Jewel in the Machine. AOC equals Rod. Regular old Democrat. I haven't heard that before. That's interesting. Omar, Sabby, love you. Free Palestine. Love you too, Omar. What's up, HMM? Because the billionaires got behind Biden as he is more malleable. There you go. Thank you, Cool Blue. Anyone referring to a left and left wing in the Democratic Party is telling us the Democratic Party is not an actual left political party. Thank you, Cool Blue. Thank you. What's up? Stop sniffing kids. CNN best in the world. LOL. Yeah, I know. I know. Thank you, Courtney. Also, it was Hillary who called for the assassination for Obama when she ran against him. Thank you, Cool Blue. I love replaying CNN's 2016 projection of Trump flipping Wisconsin and Jake Tapper noting that Hillary not seeing it coming marked the end of her campaign. Yeah. Yep. That was all on her, though. Thank you so much for the super sticker, James Starks. LPA says CNN, MSDNC, Fox all covered Bernie the same way, if they covered him at all. Revisionist history on Don's part and weak pushback from Ryan and Emily. Thank you for the super chat, Nash. Wyoming screwed Bernie too. He got 60+%. He got 7 delegates. Hillary got 11. Lance says, oh, I covered that one already. Thank you, Penny. Would Ilhan let Isra Omar protest the Ukraine war? Probably not. That's a good question. I mean, she is a college student. She kind of, your parents aren't with you on campus. So there's that. And let's give a shout out to Barbara Saslow for gifting 1 Sabby Sabs membership. Shout out to Barb in the house. All right, guys, that's it for me today. I'll be back again Tuesday evening. We do have a couple of guests that are coming on this week for interviews, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoy your Sunday evening. I don't know why I said that like that. I feel like I'm back in retail. When I worked in retail, I'm like, I hope you enjoy those pants. All right, guys, I'm out of here. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.